So good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Book Club of California's Southern California program titled Clubhouse Turn, the Twilight of Hollywood Park Racetrack. And thank you for joining us here at Pasadena Heritage's beautiful and historic Blinn House. We love having our events here, and we love having you here for our events. My name is Kevin Kosick, and I'm the Executive Director for the Book Club of California, and it's my pleasure to welcome you all and kind of MC this program tonight. For those of you that might be new to the Book Club of California, we are a nonprofit, member and donor-supported organization that is dedicated to preserving and promoting the history of the book and the book arts. Oftentimes we do that with a focus on the history and the literature of California and the West. The book club publishes limited edition books, a scholarly journal, and keepsakes. We host a year-round series of exhibitions and programs like the one this evening on topics including fine printing, design, typography, bookbinding, collecting, California history like tonight, and much, much more. Now, if you're not a member of the book club, or if your membership has lapsed and you're interested in what we do, say hello to the dog. Please consider joining our century-long tradition by becoming a member of the Book Club of California. Our membership dues are modest, and the benefits are many, and we simply can't do the work of the book club without the support of our members. So you can check us out online at bccbooks.org to join or to donate, or you could ask me about membership this evening. And now for tonight's program and our presenter. Clubhouse Turn, the Twilight of Hollywood Park Racetrack is the title for our program. And our speaker is photographer and author Michelle Asselin. Michelle Asselin explores the impact of social constructs on human experience. She uses techniques of editorial photography to examine how people and places come to reflect the larger systems of which they are a part. Early in her career, she worked for the Associated Press in the Middle East while living in Jerusalem. As an editorial photographer in the US, she created memorable portraits of people of our time. She has been commissioned for portraits by some of America's most well-known people, including Meryl Streep, Joe Biden, Martin Scorsese, Sir Ian McKellen, and Hillary Clinton. Her work has been featured in The New Yorker, as Esquire, New York Magazine, Wired, and Fortune, and on the cover of the New York Times Magazine and Time. Her subject tonight, again, is Clubhouse Turn. That is the title of her book. So, constructed on a swampy landmass in Inglewood, Hollywood Park Racetrack was envisioned by entertainment moguls. Inglewood welcomed the executives who had been excluded from other venues due to prejudice. The first turn on a racetrack immediately after the finish line, known as the Clubhouse Turn, is considered to be the best vantage point to see the finish of the race and is therefore where the privileged sit. Now, built with the values of a bygone era and the mythologies of the track, Hollywood Park was a place where the privileged and disenfranchised co-mingled. It epitomized the social complexity of a place of fantasy and dreams, winning and losing. On December 22nd, 2013, Hollywood Park Racetrack closed its doors permanently. And her book, Clubhouse Turn, is the final documentation of the historic landmark before its demolition. It's a portrait of not only the architecture and the grounds of Hollywood Park, but of those individuals whose livelihood and identities were dependent upon it. A portrait of a quickly vanishing Los Angeles. Now, if you have any questions for our speaker, and I hope you do, we're going to save those for the end. After the presentation, we'll come up and do a Q&A. I guess now it's my great pleasure to turn over the microphone to our speaker, Michelle Asselin.
Kevin. Thanks to the Book Club of California, to Hollywood, to Angel City Press, and to the LA Public Library. I have to get myself a little bit settled here so I can do this. Okay. And thank all of you I'm grateful for everyone who made it out tonight, for your interest in this project, this place, and this community. On December 22nd, 2013, Hollywood Park Racetrack closed its doors permanently. Opened in 38, partly destroyed by a fire in 49, and reopened the following year. Hollywood Park had been a staple in the horse racing community and of Los Angeles for 7 decades. So I learned about Hollywood Park Racetrack in my studio. I worked in a studio with about 40 other artists in Inglewood, California. And the studio space was like an old converted Toyota dealership. It was on the corner, there was a parking lot in front, and they had changed the offices and sort of the mechanic areas into artist studios. So one weekend each fall, the city of Inglewood organizes an open studio. They create a map, sometimes they provide transportation, and the artists who are willing to open up their studios so that people in the community, larger Los Angeles, people in the art world can come and see what the artists in the neighborhood are doing. So that year, I had been working on a series about the Domestic Labor Bill of Rights. So I'd been a magazine photographer before and a journalist before that. And my first 2 long-form projects were around the subject of domestic labor. And the work entailed formal individual portraiture on dark backdrops. So I was showing my work and people were coming in and talking, and all of a sudden a group came in and they were looking around and sort of asking questions. And all of a sudden a circle formed. It was about 16 people. I hadn't realized that they were together, but it was then that I learned about Hollywood Park Racetrack. Each member of this group was sort of connected to the track and the redevelopment of the track in some way or another. Most of them were from outside of Los Angeles, and they were getting to know the neighborhood and the locals, and this art tour was one of the ways that they were doing it. So Hollywood Park had not been on my radar. My studio was a mile away. I had grown up in the city of Los Angeles. It was so near this huge, historic, weirdly hard to see from the road because of this enormous parking lot with only a 6-story building. But it was vast, with a grandstand, casino, track, stables, practice track, and the entire thing was going to be demolished, leaving a hole in LA County the size of Disneyland. Had you flown into LAX at the time and looked down just before arrival, you would have seen a version of this site, Hollywood Park. Then for a few years you saw a hole in the ground, and now it's SoFi Stadium.
Oh, is that where it is?
That's where it is. There was no way for me not to be curious about the massive urban transformation that was about to take place in this city. Additionally, I was ready to move out of the studio. I wanted to work in the world, in public, in an unfamiliar place. I was interested in daylight, structure, details, and quite frankly, solitude. So portraiture is a very fulfilling practice, but it's emotionally engaging and takes a lot of energy. I felt it would be fascinating to work with a building as a subject matter, to work slowly and quietly and at my own pace. You'll see it's not actually what happened, but that was the idea at the beginning. By the end of the conversation, I knew this would be my next project. But I just learned demolition was gonna start and there was only a few months left. So I immediately made arrangements to walk the grounds. So this contact sheet is the first, these are the first images for my first trip there. And here you see the track, the turf, the entrances, some details. All of this was shot with my iPhone. So I ran over, I had my phone. Once I saw the structure, how massive it was, I took some imagery so that I could put together a proposal, because what I knew is that to do this project, I was gonna need, most importantly, access, the public facing spaces being interesting, but the private equally important, and I was gonna need funding. It's an epic project, and there wasn't a lot of time to get it done. so we had to work fast. A few weeks later, the project was approved, permission was granted, and I began my work. The waiting period to get it approved was so intense because each day that it wasn't approved, I knew I had a shorter time to do this project. So it was really a lot. Finally, I ended up with 15 days and we were able to get some work done. Okay, so that's sort of the origin story of what I'm about to show you. And now, before I go into the work itself, I'm just gonna give you a quick timeline of the track. There's a much more extensive timeline in the book itself that lists many dates and important events and things that happened there, but just to put it all in context. So, June 1938, the track was opened by Hollywood Turf Club. It was founded by Harry and Jack Warner and had a famous board of directors including Walt Disney, Samuel Goldwyn, Bing Crosby, and others. It was built on a bean field in Inglewood, California as a response to exclusion from other tracks. It was built by Hollywood executives to be a place of horses, lakes, glamour, fantasies, dreams. July 1938, Seabiscuit won the inaugural running of the Hollywood Gold Cup. In 1942 to 44, it was closed during World War II and used as a storage facility. May 5th, 1949, the grandstand and clubhouse were destroyed by a fire. And this is the most incredible picture of the fire that happened this wide. And if you see in the front, there are these flamingos in the lake, and I'm going to tell you about that later. Anyhow. 1950, the rebuilt facility opened, known as the Track of Lakes and Flowers. This is a postcard of the goose girl who would sit in this goose and float in the lakes. Yeah. November 10, 1984, it hosted the first Breeders' Cup. In 1991, $20 million was spent improving the racetrack. So that year, the park came into its first profit in 5 years. And despite the rioting in Los Angeles in 1992, the profits increased to $4.5 million. 1994, a casino was added, again, trying to raise the revenue. 2005, it was sold for the final time. And May 13th, a letter of closing came from the president. December 22nd, 2013, at 6:11 p.m., the final race was run, with Woodsman Luck taking first place. 2014, the complex was demolished, and now SoFi Stadium, with offices, retail parks, entertainment, gathering spots, and a walking street. So this image I took about 6 months after finishing the 15-day shoot. I was editing the film and I was editing the work, and I realized that I didn't have a wide exterior shot of the building itself. So given my history as a journalist and magazine photographer, it's sort of curious that I wouldn't have considered this establishing shot. I went over, I climbed the fence. It was then, the building was still standing, thankfully. The construction fence was up. I climbed the fence. I took this photograph. I felt better, like I had it, and I went back to my studio. But going back to my studio, I thought about it a lot because it's a very obvious picture to take, and it's something that I hadn't done in the time that I was there. We were so comprehensive about everything, and this is something that I missed. And finally, what I realized is that Hollywood Park, with its circular campus, the track in the middle, all these buildings around, participation really required that you turn your back to the outside world. And Hollywood Park was not about the approach. It was not about the exterior. It was its own world, and my work was what happened once you walked through those doors. So my work, to create a time capsule, a portrait of an end, an homage to an architectural beauty, to acknowledge a historically significant space and its community in the moments before its demise, to question how the personal narratives and fictions woven through the shared space address the interdependence and identity and place, to use the empty corridors and rooms lost in time to discuss attachment and impermanence, to witness the psychology of a moment, a full and abrupt stop, to investigate a socially complex contemporary community set against a layered backdrop, united in fantasy and dreams, winning and losing, to create a cumulative portrait of a social cross-section of individuals categorized by their relationship to a place. Embedded in these environments is evidence of both the attempted preservation, the passage of time, as well as the values of a bygone era, juxtaposed with a contemporary community and people who have dedicated their time and lives to its existence. My work is about the world inside. On a cool and sunny Wednesday afternoon, December 2013, I pulled into a massive parking lot in Inglewood, California. My plan was to photograph Hollywood Park Racetrack before it closed forever. At the time, I was a portrait photographer and spent many years capturing the subtleties of facial expression, watching carefully how happiness, sadness, anger, fear, and surprise unfold in the muscles of a face. The work of portraiture is exhilarating, but also profoundly exhausting, and I was interested in shifting my attention to buildings. So this first image is of the Turf Club. The Turf Club of that, the big shot I showed you, there's many different entrances. There's a public entrance, and this was the Turf Club entrance. You can see the script on the side. It was off to the side. It was a little structure, much more formal. So in certain years you could be a member, in certain years it was just a higher ticket price, and you would go into this distinctly 1950s building, and then there was a hallway to an elevator that would go straight to the Turf Club, which was the 4th floor of Hollywood Park. And this wall, where the sun is setting, what they had hoped to keep this wall in the landscape plans of the new site. So there was a moment in time where they were gonna try to preserve some of the elements of the park for the design going forward, but I think in the end they weren't able to do it. I was interested in shifting my attention to buildings, particularly buildings that had been lived in and well-worn. I liked the idea of working with less and working alone, and I was curious too. What does a building reveal? How is a building like a face? Growing up in Los Angeles, I spent many evenings next door to Hollywood Park. I watched Laker games, basketball at the Summer Olympics, and countless rock concerts at the Forum. Although the neighboring track was enormous, 300 acres, a capacity of 80,000 guests, the equivalent of 40 Rose Bowl stadiums, I had never paid attention until now. The central building was exactly what I'd hoped for, full of scars and personality. I knew that Hollywood Park Racetrack was a perfect subject. One of the things that became interesting about the track as I photographed it is, I've talked a lot about this circular campus and what it looks like from overhead, but you could also dissect Hollywood Park and the grandstand, and you would see sort of the layers. It was like a tiered structure. So on the top floor you had the President's Club, and then you had the Turf Club, and then you had the mezzanines and the VIPs and the member boxes, and then all the way down to the public floor, and the off-track betting was to the side. And then you had on the back side, which is where the horses were, it's called the backside, you had the barns, which was largely a one-story, and then above the barns there would be small apartments where some of the stable hands would live. So the title Clubhouse Turn acknowledges this privilege that's built into the building. The structure itself, as well as the final chapter. The Clubhouse Turn is the first turn on a racetrack, and it's where the privileged sit because it's the best vantage to see the end of a race. The interior design was so contradictory. It was hard to tell what era I'd land in. The 50s, the 60s, the 80s. It was as if a dozen different aesthetics were battling each other. Limestone walls led to tartan carpets, which led to elevators with gilded dials. There were hallways painted pink. These were actually the administrative offices, if you can imagine. Lined with cracked mirrors, and hallways painted cream with gold-flecked wallpaper. The floor was patterned carpet, then green and teal checkered linoleum, then concrete. The Turf Club elevator had an old-fashioned perch for the operator. Every stairway, restroom, and alcove featured a different color palette. So this image was taken, this pink bench and the teal cushions. We had been there for about 10 days, wandering around, taking pictures of the site, and we were off in some small, like far corner, and there was a stairway. And I went up this stairway, and there was an entire 10,000 square foot floor that we had just missed. And it was abandoned, sort of left, felt like left in a moment. Things were strewn everywhere, but this is a photograph that I took in that time period. And what we realized is the track, which was built to host so many, had been whittled down to just a couple thousand, 1,500 on a good day. And so they closed it down to accommodate the amount of people that were there. And so these areas, they weren't necessarily closed off, like you could wander anywhere you wanted, but nobody would. They weren't really inhabited. There were framed oil paintings of horses, wall-sized murals of horses, and signage in ornate gold lettering. A mid-century beauty salon was dressed up in chrome and white vinyl, and a rustic wooden bar looked like it belonged in a Belgian alehouse. There were no races scheduled that day, so the building was practically empty. Maybe because of the emptiness, it felt heavy with secrets and faded grandeur, as if ghosts were lingering in the air. I walked down a curved wood-paneled hallway, once used by horses, to enter the track. I imagined the sound of hooves clomping and jockeys murmuring. I pictured the thousands of empty red plastic arena seats filled with people cheering, winning, and losing. The sixth floor press box was strewn with old newspapers and racing forms. Beside the floor-to-ceiling windows, there were faded phone lists and beige telephones, the kind with thick coiled cords and a red button that lights up. Everything sat lifeless, coated with dust, but with no effort at all. I could imagine it as a busy, frantic hub, phones ringing, a bugle starting a race, people shouting as they watched the track. The first visit reminded me of a house I used to play in when I was a child, a friend's grandmother's house. The house was elegant, modern furniture, a sunken living room, a curved staircase, and a huge glass window that looked onto a Japanese garden. But then the grandmother died and the house felt transformed. Without its inhabitants, it felt frozen in time. Once the house was no longer the backdrop to my friend's family's life, I realized it had its own story. I had often thought of this house as an architectural version of the Velveteen Rabbit, the stuffed animal from Marjorie Williams' classic children's tale. In the story, the rabbit receives so much affection, it comes to life. Hollywood Park seemed under the same spell as the rabbit. The next time I visited the track, it was race day. I was surprised to see the building teeming with activity. There were dozens of employees, waiters, bartenders, shoe shiners, security guards, chefs, clerks, accepting bets, and making payouts, and enough patrons to make it seem busy, although apparently not busy enough. The track's attendance had been reduced to 1,500 on a good day. It was widely known that the track would soon be demolished. It seemed to me that people behaved with extra intention, doubling down on their habits and traditions, watching monitors, placing bets, serving hot dogs, and ignoring the inevitable. The visitors represented all the diversity of Los Angeles. Some seemed to belong to the track of another era, dressed up in well-preserved clothing from decades past. So this woman in green is named Mary. She was in this photograph, and she was also photographed on another day in pink. So Mary was somebody we got to know. And the reason that we did is in order to capture all of the different people who would come to Hollywood Park and all of the different people that would work at Hollywood Park, we couldn't possibly ask people to walk from where they were working to where we would be set up. So we had a pretty elaborate set, you can imagine. It was a big backdrop and it had lighting and a tripod, and at this point I had assistants. I had given up the working alone thing and I had given up the no portraiture thing, as you can see. And so we would move this set from place to place depending on the day and depending on who we wanted to capture. So sometimes we had it in the turf club, other times we had it, as you'll see, down by the jockey room. Other times we had it, on the backside with the horses. But the guests would wander. And so you would often see, because it was a small group and there were regulars, you would see guests multiple times in any given day. So Mary, every time she had a new outfit, would just come over and take a new picture. So I have many pictures of Mary. And it was kind of amazing to get to know her. We became a part of her community and she became a part of ours. So unlike Mary, other guests looked contemporary, current, high-styled, and sporty. There were people of all ages, and sometimes multiple generations visiting together. I watched a young hipster couple dressed in vintage clothes, gamely chaperoning a great uncle to his final Hollywood Park race. I noticed a couple dressed in black tie finery, the wife wearing a fur coat and lipstick the color of orange meringue. Across the room, there was a worker who seemed to have come directly from the job site, his clothes splattered with paint from head to toe. Some people had driven for hours to get here, while others lived across the street. I met more than one guest who remembered attending Hollywood Park summer camp in the 1950s. They had a camp in the infield for the kids. The visitors expressed the romance and melancholy of the impending demolition as energy and excitement. Some of the guests were regulars, others there for the final big event. Racetrack Betty, a neighborhood local, charged a small fee to collect winnings for people so they didn't have to report them to the IRS. Lawrence had been the maitre d' of the turf club and planned to retire in Brentwood when the park closed. Dick, employed for longer than most, had worked as an usher for 65 years. The bugler was named Jay, and his uniform was like that of a circus ringmaster, the crop green jacket and tight job purse. His bugle signaled the start of the race, and in between races, he would work the crowd, tipping his top hat and posing for pictures. The announcer, Vic Stauffer, sat in a small room on the roof to get the best view. He kept binoculars and statues of horses on his desk. I was free to roam wherever I wanted, and I did. I learned about worlds I didn't know existed. There were the jockeys, for instance. They knew each other well. Professional horse racing is a small world. This was another person that we photographed a fair amount. We had moved our seamless down to the jockeys area, and she certainly couldn't get them to leave that zone before races or in between races, so it was really important to be very convenient if we wanted to photograph the jockeys. And it took a minute, they weren't jumping to have their pictures taken, and so it took a little convincing. Some were interested in than others, and this jockey, who they called Candyman, came, and he was willing to do it, and we took his picture, and then he went and he won the race. And that was it. And then we got every jockey came. He came before every single race, so I have a lot of pictures of him to see the superstition that changed the relationship with them. Jockeys don't often travel with a particular horse and might not know about the temperament of the horse they'll ride. Once they have their racing assignment, they're not supposed to interact with the outside world so that they don't make a bet and throw the race. I'm not really sure that's true anymore, but they talked about it. The jockeys were sequestered in the jockey room on the ground floor, and a manager named Charlie made sure that no one came in or went out. The jockeys had their own chef, Alfonso, who wore a gray handlebar mustache and cooked anything requested. The center of the track, the infield, was itself a destination. It had been beautifully landscaped with exotic flowers and a series of lakes. There were flamingos and the remnant of a large wooden goose that had floated in the water. So this was one of the first photographs I took in the infield. It was very early morning, and I saw these flamingos, and they were, of course, posing perfectly in the reflection of the moving truck. The infield had started, because it was closed off to the public, they had started packing it up. And apparently these were the last two flamingos that they were waiting for a flight to Miami. So we photographed them before they were taken away. And something about them, they felt comical, and they felt sad, and they felt sort of representative of the life cycle of this original fantasy. So you see here in the infield, this is the large wooden goose that had floated in the water. It had a beautiful woman. She wore a dress reminiscent of the German fairy tale, and she was called the Goose Girl. I spent some time on the backside where the stables are. The backside was almost like a rural western town, with barns and dirt roads. It felt surreal to be at once on a farm in the center of Los Angeles. Some of the workers lived in rooms above the horses. So this is one of my favorite photographs from the entire project. Obviously we were working in December, it's when it was closing, so there were sort of holiday decorations about, some in the public spaces and some in the backside. And this unit with the curtain was an apartment or room shared by a couple. And the Christmas lights, they just sort of showed the spirit of the place, but also the degree to which the barns were really home for so many. And this image was taken during a move-out day, a little bit later. Some of the workers permanently lived in rooms above the horses, so the backside had all of the amenities necessary to sustain a small community. Cafeteria, mini market, game room. There was a veterinary office and a lounge where visiting trainers could sleep. Everyone on the backside woke up at about 4 a.m. because the horses needed to run before the grandstand opened. By 7, most were in line for breakfast. Many of the workers were from small towns in Latin America where they had learned horsemanship since childhood. The highest ranking position was a trainer, and the lowest was a hot walker who walked horses after every race until they cooled down. It was working with the horses on the backside that I learned something interesting about Los Angeles, that December daybreak in Los Angeles is the most beautiful sky you'll see almost anywhere. As someone who's gotten up a lot for the light, it's really notable. So a lot of the imagery that you'll see, it feels like it's at nighttime, but it's actually very early in the morning. The owner of the cafe, Debbie, served 3 meals a day, and in between drove a golf cart around peddling chips and soda. Flypaper dangled from the ceiling outside the cafe and everywhere else. I had to put that one in. Hollywood Park was ostensibly all about the horses, but I was originally drawn to the park as a structure. Then it became obvious that it was a community too. Warm and fragile, woven together like a loose knit sweater. I couldn't extricate the building from the people, and I was surprised that I ever thought I could. The resulting book of photographs contains no actual horses. Instead, it celebrates the existence of the track's eclectic, harmonious group. Over the course of 2 weeks, I photographed the interiors of the track, the exterior spaces, clubhouse, public space, barn, paddock, races, architectural details, and more. And also more than 400 individuals who lived and worked there or went to the races. I isolated them against the dark backdrop and asked them to pose how they like. So while I was working there, one of the things, so I was photographing the architectural details and for that we had a very elaborate, high-resolution digital camera. And then I used the same thing when I decided that I was gonna do these portraits. But at the time, I also had another camera that I was using for activities. So I had imagery of the goings-on of the track, the actual races, the horses as they were practicing. And so that was done in a more sort of journalistic reportage style. And when I started editing, I wasn't really sure. I didn't have a chance to think about what the book was gonna look like before because it was so fast. So I had to really figure it out. And finally, I didn't use any of that material. And I separated the people from the environment. And it felt really important for me to do that. I found that it caused the people in the spaces to have too much of a clear connection. And these people, the people that you found at the track, were everywhere on the track. So to locate them in any one place seemed wrong and inauthentic. And so that's why I wasn't really interested in documenting this specific, but in talking about the community more globally. And so that was why I ended up using the portraitures and the environment, so that each portrait really can be placed almost in every environment, which is where you might have found them. Like, you would find one of the exercise riders bedding in the front, or you would find someone who sold hot dogs drinking in the turf club. Like, it had just turned into much more of sort of an aquarium where people really went many different places. With each portrait sitting, I was consumed by the question of what would happen when the park closed. Where would each person go when they couldn't go to Hollywood Park? Would they be lonely? Would they have a broken heart? Was I the only one thinking like this? The crowds began to seem to me like extras in an episode of The Twilight Zone, oblivious to the impending doom. In the movie version in my mind, I imagined someone screaming, "Don't you all realize this is ending tonight and you'll never come back here again?" The room would be quiet for one slow motion moment, a long pause, and then real time would click back in place, and people would resume placing bets, ordering hot dogs, and cheering for the fastest horse. It was almost impossible to stop taking photos, but finally, on December 22nd, 2013 at 11 p.m., my hand was forced. The crowd filed out for the last time as the speakers played "At Last" and "Happy Trails." Some people were crying, some were singing, some were nonchalant. Those trying to filch a little piece of history, a sign, or a doorknob were stopped by a security guard. When the last person exited the grounds, the gates were locked. The horses were loaded into trailers in the coming weeks and moved across town or to Oklahoma, New Jersey, or Kentucky. The auctioneer sifted through what was left, and then in 2014, Hollywood Park was razed. After 15 days of circling the grounds, hauling my equipment from place to place, I was 12 pounds thinner and had hardly seen my kids. I had taken 25,000 photographs, conducted 50 hours of interviews, met countless people, and completely lost track of time. It would be more than a year before I finished sorting through it all. I wondered what I had fixed in time: the end of something, evidence of its existence, traces of time. With this book, my aim is not to provide a historical record, but to transmit a feeling of place, of existence, and of an ending. Clubhouse Turn muses about a time that was, an inevitable foreclosing future, photographed during a rare period when the past, present, future were all equally palpable. And finally, do you have that audio file?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I can show you that.
I'm gonna leave you with one of the voices from the track. It's from one of the interviews with someone named Jimmy the Hat. He was a regular, a gambler, a careerist, and he knew everyone. He sums it all up.
It's a lifetime thing. The beauty of the racetrack is that a variety is the spice of it.
Oh, did I mess it up?
Yeah, you did. That's okay. Let's get it started. Because it doesn't play through there. I don't know why it's playing through here. Let's see if we can get this to play. If you can hear it.
It's a lifetime thing. The beauty of the racetrack is that a praying that he's gonna find a $5 voucher that somebody threw away, or a ticket that got dropped that is worth $4.40.
Were you able to hear that? Or most of that?
Yes.
More technology on.
Thank you. Yeah, exactly.
Well, we have some time for some questions, so we'll take some. Gloria, let's go you first.
So who was the original architect of Hollywood Park, do you know?
Froelich,
Oh, okay.
yeah. Yes.
Me?
Candace.
Two things. The paintings inside, were those Fred Stone paintings? It looks sort of like his autograph on one of them. Were most of those Fred Stone, the
Which-
horses?
Oh, the horses.
The big, beautiful ones.
I can't tell you. I do not know who did those paintings.
I think they were.
They might have
Also,
been.
there was a shot, you said it was a hallway and it was, of all things, it was carpeted in blue. And you said that's where they went out to the track? The horses went out on carpet?
That was dirt, and it might have just looked like that in the slide, but no, so it was wood panels.
Yeah.
And then it had been dirt, and then it was at the end it was coated in like more of a concrete, because it wasn't used for horses anymore. So the horses couldn't have gone on the concrete, but it wasn't used for horses when we were there. There was a moment in time, and then they moved the paddock and how they entered. So then it became a weird, like went from the administration building out to the track where the jockey's room were. It wasn't really anything anymore.
Okay.
Yeah, just a
curious
passageway,
about that.
yeah.
What?
We'll go here and then here.
Wow, what a Herculean effort.
Thank you. It
Is there
was.
going to be a second book with material that didn't get in this book?
Not as of now.
No? No, okay.
We'll see.
Take a break.
Yeah, exactly.
Was there a reason why you didn't have one shot of a horse?
Yes. There are so many photographs of horses from this time and from this shoot. I mean, I photographed every race and all the practices, but when I was editing the project, I really wanted this book to be about the community of people, and I wanted it to be about the architecture, and I wanted it to be about Los Angeles. And the horse racing was incidental to that. It was why people were there, and it was a passion, but the community existed outside of them, and I didn't want it to turn into a book about racing or about horses. I wanted it more to be about the site itself. It was, Hollywood Park, like there's a couple of people I met tonight who said, oh, I went there and I had these memories. Like for some people it was this incredible memory, for some people it was a special event, and for some people it was like a living room. Like literally people would walk across the street and it was like where they'd meet their friends after work. And so it had this sort of varied use depending on why you were there or where you were coming from. And I felt like it was more interesting for me to talk about the people there than the pastime.
We have a question back here? Yeah.
Yeah, thank you for putting together the slideshow, and similar to his question, you took so many photographs, and what happens to all the other pictures, or how does that feel when you complete a project? Is it,
Yeah.
it's sort of open-ended, because, today people take so many pictures, a lot of people never even look at them again.
Yeah.
What happens?
I mean, I don't know that anything will happen to them, to be totally honest. When I went in, there's ways you go into projects, right? So like, I've had projects where I've had like 7 minutes to accomplish something, and then projects where you have a month and a half or whatever it is. And so going into this, I didn't have much time to prepare because I learned about it and it was closing and I sort of had to hustle through it. I knew I wanted to do it. I had some sense that it was going to be at the building. I realized very early on it was going to be about the people. But at the time that I was working, I was just photographing specifically those two things, but then everything, because it was like a knee-jerk reaction to place was all I could do. And so it was very intuitive work. And I worked quickly, but it was whatever sort of was interesting to me in the moment. And then going back, it was too much. To distill a story was more poignant and more valuable, I think, than including everything for me. And so it's like a hard moment, right? Like you have to shed all this work that's spectacular and super interesting, but like you can't include everything. And so I sort of had to pick a lane, and this is what I decided to do. But yes, it's not a great problem, but
That's a downer, that's the.
yeah, but
Yeah.
you know, I mean, it's nice to have more than you need, and it's nice to be able to make choices. But it's true, there's a couple that I really wish I could have included, but once I had decided that I was going to present it this way, I stuck with it.
Let's just take a couple more questions. We have Elizabeth first, and then we'll go here.
Yes, did you do any amount of oral history with these interesting people, even a fragment of asking them about themselves?
I have 50 hours of interviews,
Oh.
and the interviews we edited, they were edited and they weave through the book. So that was really important to me, to keep the voices from the people who were there, because this was an amazing place, but it's not my history, right? Like I spent 15 days in Hollywood Park my entire life. I didn't know it when I was growing up. I'd been to the Forum, as I said, right next door. I still didn't feel like I had just never been there. It wasn't part of my family's activities to go to the racetrack. So I really wanted voices of people who had loved it, who had been there, who knew it well, to be represented in the book in a way that I couldn't possibly do. And so as we were moving the backdrop, I had a documentary filmmaker do interviews. So she would pull people who had been photographed already, and then they would do an interview. And I took the transcripts and edited them together in a very long string that doesn't have a beginning or end. It's just memories and ideas and thoughts about the track, and it weaves through the book.
Oh, that's nice.
Yeah.
And here, up front.
So you talked about the need for permissions, and that took so long. So what kind of permissions did you need?
So, well, it didn't take long by this normal standards. It was just, I was in this very big rush because it was closing, right? So it took a week or 10 days, which, made the project shorter. I needed access. So there was the president of the Hollywood Park Club, and then there was the ownership of the company that was in charge of the redevelopment. And so those two entities were working together to sort of have the track end and figure out the construction and how it's all gonna go. But I wanted to be able to go into the jockey's room, and I wanted to be able to go into the administrative offices in the barns and kind of have free reign, because it didn't feel like it was gonna be a complete project if I couldn't access all areas. And so they had to agree. It was a tough moment for a lot of people because so many of them didn't want this track to end. It was a beloved place for so many. It was apparently like a very good track for horses because it's so close to the ocean, so it's cool. The stables were still made out of wood. There were all these reasons why people didn't want, and also there were, the board was involved in the structure and the company and the history anyhow. So to have someone photograph at this moment where it was ending felt very tricky. Like in the one way it was memorializing something important and capturing this moment. In the other way, it was an acknowledgement that this was gonna be gone, which I think a lot of people hadn't really wrapped their heads around. And so to have some person or a photographer going into their very private existence or whatever felt tricky. So it just took a minute, but in the end, it was worthwhile, and it was, welcomed, and we were able to do what we wanted, and people were really gracious and appreciative, and so that was a nice feeling.
Greg, did you have a question?
Yes.
And then Gloria.
Do you do gallery exhibitions with your work, Pat?
I have, yes, I have. The first time this was shown, it was shown in the Orange County Museum. It was part of a show, their triennial about architecture and the built environment impermanence, so it had sort of obvious relevance. And then pieces of the project have been shown in other places. There was a solo show that was done over a second project that I did inside the casino as that closed. And so, yes, this has gone a couple of places, and we'll see if it keeps going.
And Gloria, you
That
have the
was my
last question. You don't have it?
Yeah, that was it.
Okay, Candace, you get the last question.
Are you gonna be showing anywhere around here, and if so, who's gonna tell us? Kevin?
Hopefully I will, and Kevin will tell you.
So us, we will be responsible for that.
Exactly.
That would be great.
So we're out of time, so maybe we can all give a big thanks to our speakers. And of course, a big thank you to you all for attending this evening. Also a big thanks to our partners, Angel City Press, who published this gorgeous book. It is available in the back. If you haven't picked one up, you should check it out. There's a display copy you can look at, but get a copy for yourself if you're interested. It's beautiful. It's big. And it has all the images that we saw in it, pretty much. Right?
Most of them.
Okay, I didn't mean to put you on
I
the spot.
gave you guys a few more.
Oh, okay.
The talk is a few more.
Got it. So, thanks everybody for joining us. Our next program is in San Francisco on Monday, March 18th at 6 p.m. It's online as well as in person. You can join us for that. The title is Redemptive Dreams, Engaging Kevin Starr's California. It's an in-person and virtual presentation by author and professor of sociology at the University of California, Los Angeles, Jason S. Sexton. So join us for that on Monday evening. You can register for any book club event online at bccbooks.org, or you can respond to any of the emails that you might be getting from the book club. I hope you're all on our mailing list so you know about all of our great programs. And I look forward to seeing you again at another book club program. Thanks, everyone.